Domestic abuse is an intensely private matter. However, with films such as Once Were Warriors and news stories surrounding infants such as Nia Glassy and the Kahui twins, child abuse began attracting a lot of public attention, bringing it into the public sphere and turning it into a community problem. New Zealand has struggled with how to prevent the abuse and neglect of children in need. The issue of child abuse has been kept in the public eye by a steady stream of high-profile child maltreatment cases, which has created a public demand for more attention to be paid to the care and protection of children. Although such media dissemination is good in order to facilitate public discussion, it can be seen as detrimental as it underrepresents the figures of child abuse, with only the most severe making headlines. Furthermore, with the main focus of the headlines being on the physical abuse of children, other forms of abuse such as neglect and psychological abuse are scarcely discussed. The definition of child abuse includes the harming, whether physically, emotionally, or sexually, ill treatment, abuse, neglect, or deprivation of a child. It is clear this definition is deliberately broad in order to encompass the varying forms of abuse, all of which detrimentally impact children. The news media focus on the physical abuse of children because it can be seen as inherently newsworthy. The effects can be clearly seen, and thus the short-term impacts are self-evident. The problem with this is that it narrows this broad definition of child abuse, making other, less visible forms of child abuse appear less serious. Psychological abuse is a pattern of behaviour where a child is rejected or put down. They may be isolated, constantly degraded, or criticised. This can occur in the smallest instances of name-calling to larger issues such as witnessing or being threatened with violent behaviour. All of this affects how a child develops and their interactions with others, and although there are no bruises to show, the psychological effects can be devastating. In 2013 alone, there were over 12,000 reported cases of emotional abuse and over 5,000 reported cases of neglect. However, they've not been the focus of news reporting. With news reports predominantly focusing on the violence these children have been exposed to, this is where the government and individual response is being focused. As mentioned, child abuse has become a public issue. If someone sees a child with an unexplainable bruise, cut, or burn, concerns are likely to be raised. By condemning physical abuse against children, the media is effectively socialising society and teaching them that such behaviour is wrong. We've been told through the news media how to react, how to recognise domestic violence, and how to prevent it. It normalises the idea that interfering in family matters is acceptable when a child is in danger. This is because it's depicted as a morally repugnant act which threatens the community, and therefore society is willing to intervene. Conversely, the lack of discussion around psychological abuse and its effects on children perpetuates its use. Psychological abuse or neglect, although they're at least, if not more, detrimental to a child's well-being, are harder to detect. It's harder for the media to get the public's attention due to the lack of outward effects, and therefore it leaves society unaware of how to react. Therefore, even if we're aware of the issue, we're left unaware of how to prevent it. This can lead to further issues of isolation in children facing emotional abuse, because they left feeling like their issues are not serious enough to be talked about, and if they did, they wouldn't get a response. This can be seen as a crisis because these less visible forms of abuse can severely impact the development of children, leading to serious behavioural problems in the long run. Therefore, invisibility does not mean that there are no effects, but rather they result in outcomes that may emerge in different stages in the children's lives. Children who witness abuse within their household are more likely to follow a path of crime and violence, with children who are abused and neglected abuse growing up to be the same adults filling the courts and prisons. Thus, the government resources are focused on addressing these youths once they meet the criminal justice system, rather than identifying the at-risk youths and helping to prevent their abuse before it can have these negative impacts. This also presents a potential threat to normative family values, with psychologically damaging behaviour becoming a new social norm in disciplining children. 25% of abused or neglected children are more likely to experience delinquency, teen pregnancy, low academic results, drug use, and mental health problems, with this contributing to unemployment, housing, and sole parenthood, which all contributive factors which increase the risk of maltreatment. Psychological abuse of children is a crisis because it's emotionally affecting the development of the next generation who can bring such problems into their own relationships, validating the use of threats as power and persisting the cycle of abuse. The media need to be educating society on how to recognise at-risk children before the abuse occurs. This recognises that current responses to child abuse have been inadequate, as numbers of reported cases have been steadily rising. This suggests that we need community involvement beyond the standard response processes. As teachers, you form a part of a child's community, and therefore have a role to play to ensure they develop successfully. Cohesive neighbourhoods can operate as an external protective factor, helping to protect from abuse even when risk factors are present within the family. Looking at the film Once Were Warriors, we can see the common features the public may associate with at-risk families. These include low socioeconomic households where unemployment, drug and alcohol abuse, and involvement in gang-related activity are present. However, while socioeconomic disadvantage may contribute to family instability, abuse occurs across the whole socioeconomic spectrum. This reinforces the biggest problem with this crisis. It's hard to identify and could occur in any family. Recently, such misconceptions have been challenged. The idea that abuse is confined to a certain race or low-income houses has been tackled in the media through the It's Not Okay campaign, which recognises both physical and emotional abuse of children and emphasises that such abuse happens throughout all parts of society. Through this campaign, they've set up a website and a helpline which tries to target all areas of family violence, from those who need help to those who need to change their behaviour. It's noted that K campaign is an important tool, as the website encourages you to engage with the content, thus increasing the likelihood that you'll do something to respond to what you're seeing. As mentioned, identification of psychological abuse is difficult, but it's not impossible. Here are some examples of signs provided by Child, Youth and Family, which seen together or alone could be indicative of abuse. First of all, there are physical signs, with indicators of emotional abuse being problems sleeping such as bedwetting, nightmares or poor sleep patterns. There are also behavioural concerns. This is an important factor because children cannot easily describe how they're feeling. If a child seems unusually difficult or withdrawn, aggressive or anxious, or unable to cope in social settings, this could be indicative of something that's not right at home. In a classroom, it's necessary to be aware of developmental delays. A child suffering from abuse or neglect can have negative impacts on their development. If you think a child might be at risk, it could be beneficial to compare their developmental milestones with the children around them. Once you believe you've identified an at-risk child, there are ways to help. All of these examples are helpful because often abuse occurs due to stress within the household. Letting a stressed family member know that you're there to listen and support can help to relieve such anxiety before it's released in detrimental ways. There are numerous resources available to help guide those working with children and families in order to ensure the safety of those most vulnerable. For more information and contact details, please see the resources attached. Thank you.